Okay. Hello, everybody. It's 4 o'clock on my watch, back on time, depending on which part of the continent you're joining us today. If you're in the UK, it's 4 o'clock. If you're in East Africa, it's 6 o'clock. Welcome to the webinar today. My name is Saumu Lwembe. I work for the National Institute for Health and Care Research, where I serve as the Assistant Director for Community Engagement and Involvement and Patient and Public Involvement and Engagement. I am today going to be chairing this webinar, and I'm going to do that jointly with my colleague Gary, whom I shall invite now to introduce himself to you. Gary, please.
Thank you very much, Samu. I'm Gary Hickey, and I also work for the National Institute for Health and Care Research, and I work in the Patient and Public Involvement team and indeed the Research Inclusion team. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much, Gary. So today we are also delighted to be joined by the NIHR Director for Public Voice, Jeremy Taylor, who will have an opportunity to introduce himself and share reflections later on in the webinar. So this webinar is the first of a series of webinars in a program of work which will enable reciprocal sharing of global health innovations in working with people and communities. These could be novel ideas, inventions, processes, approaches, and learnings, all aimed at improving health and care research outcomes. To introduce today's webinar, I have the pleasure to invite Professor Kara Hanson, the Global Health Program Research Director, who is going to join us via video today. Isabel, please.
Good afternoon. I am Professor Kara Hanson, and I'm the Director of the Global Health Research Program at NIHR. I'm really sorry I'm not able to be with you at the webinar today, but I'm really happy to have the opportunity to introduce it. This is the first of a series of webinars where we're going to be exploring the interconnectedness of community engagement and involvement in both the Global South, where the Global Health Research Program conducts its research, and in marginalized communities in the UK. And we're going to be looking at the question, what learnings from the Global South may be translatable into policy or practice in the UK NHS and in social care research context, specifically with a focus on community involvement and engagement. So NIHR understands community involvement and engagement as global health research undertaken in collaboration with the communities that are most likely to be affected by the research outcomes. And this really implies an ongoing partnership where decisions are shared from the very start, right from the point where research questions are identified, the planning of the research, and then being involved in its implementation, its communication and dissemination, and in its uptake and impact. I'm really proud that the Global Health Research Program has been a leader in this area, requiring our award holders to demonstrate how they're involving communities, but also enabling them to do this by allocating enough resource to do it effectively and meaningfully. Our award holders recognize this commitment, and they really appreciate how it encourages them to develop and expand their CEI skills and approaches. And our recent program portfolio evaluation, that was an external evaluation, captured the wide range of ways in which award holders have done this. In its domestic programs, NIHR has also been a pathfinder in prioritizing patient and public involvement in research. So this is an area that's really ripe for cross-learning. One reason for this is that the demographics of some of our underserved communities in the UK reflect the same characteristics of those in marginalized communities in the Global South. So learning from others about working in challenging contexts might be useful to understand some of the social and cultural and historical backgrounds of communities here in the UK, especially those that are traditionally underserved by research. And this can help to create methods and approaches that have been demonstrated to work and make the way for more reflective, more responsive, and respectful collaborations with communities and their organizations. At NIHR, in the Global Health Research team, I think that this is a subject that we've really not explored thoroughly enough. I think that while there are a lot of good principles and widely used approaches, I'm not sure that we really have enough evidence about which approaches work best and in which contexts. So we see this dialogue today as one way of really enriching this conversation. And taking it further, we know there's loads to learn about different approaches that are taken in different geographies and different communities, as we're set out to really try to address health problems that affect all of us, and they're not respectful of geographic borders.
Thank you, Professor Hanson. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the 4 panelists we have today. These are acknowledged experts who all have many years of practical experience in working with people and communities in health and care research in their respective settings. 2 of the panelists are based in the Global South and 2 are based in the United Kingdom. Our first panelist is Dr. Walter Flores. He is a social scientist and human rights advocate with over 25 years of professional experience working in more than 30 countries worldwide with different population groups. Currently, Dr. Walter Flores works as a research associate of the Center for the Study of Equity and Governance in Health Systems in Guatemala and professor at the School of International Service, American University, Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. Our second panelist today is Noni Mumba. Noni is the head of community engagement at the Kenya Medical Research Institute Wellcome Trust Research Program in Kenya. Noni has extensive experience in developing best practice strategies for the involvement of communities and public in research work through innovative engagement initiatives in sub-Saharan Africa. Our third panelist is Dr. Joe Welsman. Dr. Welsman is a public involvement specialist within the NIHR research organizations, like the Research Support Service, the PEN-ARC, all based in the United Kingdom. Currently, she is the Public and Patient Involvement and Engagement Strategic Lead for the NIHR Research Support Service Hub delivered by the York and Partners at the University of York. Last but not least, our fourth panelist is Dr. Andy Gibson. Dr. Gibson is Associate Professor in Patient and Public Involvement at the University of West England in the United Kingdom. He has a social sciences background with a strong focus on public involvement in health research. Dr. Gibson has worked with underserved population groups and also developed a framework for conceptualizing patient and public involvement and engagement for researchers. So, Walter, Noni, Andy, and Joe, please welcome to the webinar. We do have a set of questions we will be asking of you. We will also be picking up questions from audience, which will be facilitated by my co-chair, Gary. But so to start with you, I think even from the introductions that we all made, we were exploring the concept of patient and public involvement, community engagement and involvement. And we realized that there are many commonalities in engaging communities in different settings. But coming down to these semantics or concepts that we use, are there any key similarities or differences in the way we may use language or interpret community engagement and involvement or patient and public involvement and engagement? Can I invite you, firstly, Noni, to share your reflections on this?
Thank you, Saumu. Please confirm that I can be heard.
Yes,
loud and clear. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So, I mean, there are important similarities and a bit of differences in the way we use language or the way we interpret engagement in the global north and in the global south. I think for me, one of the main differences, which is a difference but can also be a similarity, is just the groupings of the people and what we term them. So in the global south, we use the term community really to refer to, sort of like local community members who are, found in homes and, villages, whereas The same term community can also, be used to refer to people who work in a certain workplace, people who have a certain ailment, and they have grouped themselves into a community. For example, a community of people who live with HIV. So those they can be seen as though there are differences. For example, in the global north, patients that is referred to PPI. But I think for me that's one of the areas where sometimes language can be the same, but also a little bit different in terms of how it's used and what it means.
Thank you so much, Nani. How about you, Jo? Shall we hear your reflections, especially from the global north?
I agree with a lot of what Nani has said. I mean, in the context within which I work, I mean, patient public involvement traditionally has been very much working with people with a lived experience of a particular health condition or a particular service. So they come in and get involved in research with a bit of prior knowledge about what that research topic is likely to be about. I think when we were talking about community engagement, we're talking about a much broader involvement. So we might be starting from scratch by engaging with people who've had no previous interaction with health and social care research, who are coming to this very new, who probably don't really understand the world of research and how it works and what goes on in it, and indeed how they might be involved. And particularly in our context, when we talk about community engagement, we tend to be working with people who are underserved by research or underrepresented in research. So they tend to be the people that we haven't traditionally worked with previously. But I think then from my own practice in this field, I've also started talking about working with people from communities, because we tend to use this term of working with communities, community engagement. Communities have lots of little mini communities within them. And so and there are lots of differences between those people from those communities. So I always like to talk about working with people from communities, because they may or may not represent that community from which they're drawn. So I think there's an interesting way in which we talk about communities, and we mustn't talk about people as if they are all one thing.
Thank you so much, Jo. That's a very interesting add-on to our theoretical underpinning when we are talking about the approaches for community engagement and involvement. So that's a really interesting reflections, and I would be keen to hear the reflections from our audience about what both Noni and Jo has said. So now let's turn us to the importance of involving the public or communities in health and care research. Andy, if I can start with you, I mean, from our interactions, we realize or we understand that you've been involved in several activities aimed at evaluating public involvement in research. Can you tell us more about the key issues we should be thinking about or considering when evaluating the value of public and community involvement in health and care research?
Yeah, thank you. And I think what the place to start is to think about for whose benefit is the evaluation being taken place, and who's setting the agenda for that evaluation. I think in a UK context, there's been a lot of debate about evaluating the impact and proving the value of community involvement or patient and public involvement. But I think a lot of that has really been about a struggle to gain acceptance and prove that this is well worth doing. And so I don't think that's always been driven by what's best for the community. And there's also a question where you say, frankly, do you really need to evaluate the fact that it's good to work with the people that research is meant to benefit? Do we really need evidence? It's just kind of a bit of a no-brainer for me personally. And there's been a lot of research looking at the impact of public involvement now, and we've got lots of case studies of how it's helped to make more relevant research questions, more accessible interventions, more relevant outcomes. And there's been another strand in the debate which has been very powerful, which has come from a kind of rights-based approach that said the people who are meant to benefit from research and the people who pay for it through their taxes and so on, we shouldn't have this paternalistic attitude. People should be involved as a right, as encapsulated in the phrase, nothing about me without me. And can you really evaluate that? It's just a thing you do. That being said, I'd kind of slightly put an angle on that in the sense of saying that does raise a question, but it also raises a very different kind of evaluation, which is if we're claiming to work with people in some sense on in an equal footing or a co-produced way? Are we really walking the walk? And I think there's a different kind of evaluation, which is not about proving that PPI works, but how we do it better and how we prove that we are genuinely working with people in a reciprocal way. And I think also people who've been involved do want to know that their involvement has made a difference, that it's not just a talking shop. So my own view on this is, if we're doing evaluation that's driven about proving to somebody else that it's worth doing, I'm less enthusiastic. If it's about doing evaluations to improve the way we work with underserved communities and people who've not been previously involved, better ways of doing it, then I'm all for it. But it's a different kind of evaluation, and I think it is worth just starting off with, who's the evaluation for, who's it being driven by, and what do you want to show with it? And I think if it's being done from a bottom-up point of view, that agenda and how it's done should be set by the people we're working with. And for me, the emphasis on how we improve the way we work with people.
Thank you so much. And I think a very good reflections there. Really, I mean, two for me stand out. This constant negotiation to gain acceptance in the work. It is a real struggle, isn't it, many times? And then again, when you look at the focus in work, either within underserved communities or addressing health inequalities, really at the crux of it is about this rights-based approach. Whose voice is really missing here at the table, and how can we meaningfully incorporate this? So turning to you, Walter, I think for me, sustainability is a key element when we think about meaningful involvement of people and communities in health and care research. How has the work you have done addressed health inequalities?
Yeah, great. So for health inequalities, when we are working with marginalized populations, I would say that the most important part is to study, analyze, and do research on structural drivers of inequality. Because we only get the research on the interaction of people we provide, that we are missing that whatever is happening in that interaction is actually mediated, is actually caused by these larger structural and historical inequalities. So one purpose, if we're aiming for sustainability, is addressing and understanding these structural inequalities. And the second one is that every single research is an opportunity for marginalized communities to develop skills and knowledge about how their own health, what is affecting the health, but also how to interact with public officials, with health officials. Because in this work of doing a community engagement interaction, we are not aiming just to produce the scientific evidence, we are aiming just as a first step for communities to use that evidence to engage with public officials in demand improvements on protocols of services, improvements on quality of service, but also in resource allocation of services. So to me, for sustainability, it's crucial to see that the work doesn't end on producing the evidence. It's just the first step to improve the quality of our advocacy to improve services for marginalized communities.
Thank you very much, Walter. A very interesting reflections there in terms of working, especially with marginalized communities. I'll pause here now and invite Gary, because I've been seeing the Q&A chat really picking up. Gary, do we have any questions from the audience based on what our panelists have reflected so far?
The questions are piling in, Samu. However, no one has voted yet on the questions. Almost started to vote. So I'm going to pick one out from Heidi Sarridge here. Panelists, what three things can we share and learn from each other in CEI and PPI? And I'm going to ask Noni that question first of all, if that's okay, Noni.
Yes, that's okay. I don't know whether to say the three or to say one and leave the two to others. So I think some of the really key things that sort of like important for both CEI and PPI is that as a team, as you're planning, you know, your PPI, you need to have sort of like a goal, an aim. Why are you doing it? I think one of the things that has been said by one of my colleagues in the panel is you know, sometimes it's as though you only just want maybe to get buy-in or to sort of like have people and accept what it is that you want to do in their space. So it's really important. It's key both for CEI and PPI. It's really important to be able to say, why are you doing the engagement? What's the aim of your engagement? What are you aiming to achieve out of the engagement? And it's really important not only to think about what you want to draw out of the engagement, but also for the partners, for the audience, for the people who are participating or you're involving, what's in it for them? What are they going to get? What are they going to benefit? How are they going to you know, be part and parcel? So the goal should not be an inward-looking goal, but a goal where, you know, both parties are you know, deriving some benefit from. So I think that would be one thing that I would be thinking about. I'll let my colleagues maybe speak on other two also.
What I would suggest, we've got loads of questions coming in and people are voting now. Sam, I've got time for another question.
Okay, a quick one, yes.
Okay, I'll ask this of Andy. Often, involvement and engagement stroke dissemination activities can be confused. Can you speak to this and highlight how best to tease out the differences between them?
So that was involvement, engagement, and what was the other one?
Engagement stroke dissemination can be confused.
Yeah. So it's interesting because these words are used differently in different places. So if I was talking in the UK, we would use the word involvement to specifically refer to co-designing research. So helping to pick the research question, design an intervention, pick an outcome measure. That would be involvement. Engagement would be about telling people about the research findings, and that might be done in a very, very creative way, using all sorts of workshops and creative outputs. And I think also dissemination of knowledge is part of that, but dissemination of knowledge is, I think, slightly more than engagement in the sense that it's about actually getting the knowledge put into practice. So it's how do you work with to use a term, the people who use the evidence, the decision makers that use the evidence to present evidence in a way that's useful. What I just would like to also say is I think it may be developed initially as 3 separate traditions, but the problems we're all facing, particularly in developing inequalities, are meaning that we're all as different traditions tackling the same problems. So even though we're using similar words, we're converging. So the people who do knowledge mobilization are now saying you need to do it right from the very beginning and ask the people from the beginning about the questions. And the people who are doing the engagement are saying you can't just leave engagement till the end. You need to work with people from the beginning. And that's what we're saying. So it almost feels like the pressure is forcing us towards a co-evolution, if that makes sense. That we've started off from different traditions and different parts, but we're overlapping and coming together and tackling the different problems.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Martha, for the question. Back to you, Salmo.
Oh, thank you so much, Gary. Okay, so let's now talk about the work with people and communities underserved in research, which all of you together, you've done a lot of that work. Oh, am I frozen? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but you are frozen.
Yeah, we can hear you.
It's okay.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry, I'm not sure where you had me last, but I want us to turn into your work with people and communities underserved in research. And if I can start with you, Walter, could you please tell us about the work you've done in enhancing participation of Indigenous people to address discrimination and promote equity in health systems? What are the challenges and how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, one of the first challenges is when we as researchers think that we know or we have a good idea about the answers, and we are just engaging with communities just to explain to them what they need or what the research is going to do. So I would say that is the first challenge that requires a total change of frame of mind, that we have part of the information, but there is no way that we can know more than those people living those conditions. People with lived experience, there is no way, it's impossible that we can know more. So first is to change the frame of mind, and we have some part of the information, the knowledge, but those ones living with the conditions are the ones that have most of the information. So with that frame of mind, instead, you do not see community engagement as a requirement anymore, but as a strategic condition for your research to make it more effective. That there is people that have most of the information that will make my research more important, for instance. And that part, we managed to change the frame of mind of saying that avoid this top-down view of academic research of the expert just telling people what is the research about, is change completely the power relation as well, that we start seeing communities as the people that we need for our own research, but also that we are committed to providing help, providing our knowledge to identify solutions for those problems. So then they become as our partners. And in this process, what is important that you start seeing that this is a relationship based on dignity. You respecting the dignity community, the communities realize that, because dignity doesn't have income level, doesn't have level of education. Any of us, because it's based on our humanity, knows whether we are treated with dignity or not. So once we see this range of dignity, then we see that the whole working community starts flowing. It becomes a unified team among researchers and among communities.
Thank you so much, Walter. Dignity is such an important concept. I think that if one embraces, it really can be a game changer in our approaches. Joe, I'm still reflecting in my mind the statement earlier where you're proposing to work with people from the communities as opposed to working with communities. I wondered, how does your approach vary when engaging marginalized communities compared with more affluent communities?
Well, I think I'll focus some, if I may, on how I've approached working with communities, because we're fairly familiar with working with more traditional public involvement, probably. And this kind of links into what Andy was saying earlier when he was talking about evaluation, about we need to improve the way we work and we need to work with people genuinely to in a reciprocal way. So I've really been focusing on how can I support? My role is to support researchers to develop public involvement, community engagement. And there are lots of toolkits. There's lots of guidance that says, you know, build trust, build good relationships, take your time. But how do we do that? That's a difficult one. So I've been developing a kind of framework which is very much loosely based around the theory that underpins some of the work that we've done with the evaluation with Andy as well. But it's basically about, we can't work effectively with communities unless we understand them and we understand each other's worlds better. So it's really a framework for going into a community, and I think building trust is so important. And most of us that work in public involvement, community engagement, as individuals, we are very good at building rapport with people, at building trust very quickly. But trust is a multi-layered thing. So we maybe have that initial trust. But what we find with communities is that we need to then develop those relationships so that the people we're working with will build trust with the organisation we represent. So it's kind of a multi-layered thing. It's not a simple kind of one-stop process. So I've been working with communities, and really that the work says it within kind of workshop situation. Tell me about your community. Tell me about your life world. What's it like? Who's in it? What do you value? Who do you value? How does it work? And that just enables really simple questions, but it enables a really rich discussion that allows the people from the communities to tell you about their world. So it's also good because it puts them on the front foot. They are telling you about their world and how it all works. But then you invite them also to talk about the research world, the world that we know very well. What do you think about it? How do you feel about it? What do you know about it? Who do you think works in it? What do you think people in it value? That opens a really rich vein of discussion. If I'm honest, people in communities don't know much about our world. You know, they haven't interacted with health and social care research much. But what it does is it opens a really rich vein of discussion around other system worlds, if you like. So talking about the local health services, talking about the relationship with education, with prison services, probation, social services. And then you have a really good sense of probably levels of distrust with services. So then you, in another workshop, and this all takes time, to build that relationship further, say, right, so if we're going to work together to develop some research, what does that shared space look like where we can come together? And you allow the people in the communities to take bits from, you know, this is what we value, this is our community, and this is the research world, and we're going to take, we want some of that, but this is what it needs to look like. And what you end up with a really detailed template for how that community wants to work. And so you will get, for example, you know, there's usually a section that says you need to understand, and then there'll be a list of statements that the community feel really strongly that you need to understand. This is what our community values, you know, and this, if you want to work with us, this is what it needs to look like. So then you can kind of bring researchers in, and you've got this really a much better understanding of where everybody is coming from, what the strengths are in the community, and what they value from your world, if you like. So it's kind of a bit of a scramble through, but I hope it gives you a flavour of how it takes using that framework and taking time to build that genuine understanding of the people that you're working with.
Thank you so much for that nugget, Joe. I know researchers are really fond of frameworks, so that I think lays out something that they can take home with them. Really keen to hear the questions that audience have in there. But back to what you're saying, Joe, I think you talked about this multi-layered nature of building trust. And I wonder, Noni, turning to you, how did you go about building and developing trust with communities? Does, for example, working with youth, women, or faith groups differ, considering these multi-layered levels, if you like, of building this trust and relationships?
Yeah, thank you, Salmo. True. First of all, just to acknowledge that building trust is not easy. In our experience, what we have seen is that you can build trust, trust can be broken, and you need time and effort to rebuild, broken trust. And there are many things in the community that can happen that would break trust once you have, made an effort to build it. And indeed, there are sort of like not very big differences, but building trust with the different groups depends on how are you approaching them, how are you working with them. The key ingredient, really, from what we have seen in our work here in Kilifi in Kenya, is being open. And as has been said by my colleagues, being open, really being very keen on genuinely and demonstrating to the community members that you genuinely want to hear their views, you genuinely want to get them to input into the work that you're planning. It's not you coming in and just telling them and talking down on them and then going away. So engagement and building trust is basically a relationship, and you're building a relationship with these people, and you need to put in the time, you need to put in the effort, you need to listen. So what we've done is also sort of like segmenting our audience. It's really important to do the segmentation. There are times and points where you can bring them together, but we have had sessions with young people, we have had sessions with men, we have had sessions with women, and we have had opportunities to bring all of this together in one room to engage them and get to hear their views. It's really important to listen to what do they think are important things to them, and link this to the work that you are doing, and be able to take into consideration their own views about the work that you're doing, take into account and even take on some of the recommendations that they're making, be open, establish means and ways of communicating with these groups, all of them. So in our experience, for example, we have sort of like a helpline type of a mechanism where people are free to call us at any time, ask questions, and we listen to them. They can walk into our offices, ask to see somebody and get heard. And even in meetings, the moderators make it clear to members of the community or audience that we're talking to that, their views are really important. And when something has happened, for researchers, it's really important to be responsive. Oftentimes we find that scientists want to really get sort of like buy-in, engage right at the beginning, do their research and go away. These are trust destroyers, because when you engage, then people are still waiting for you to come back and tell them, what did you find? That continues to build that trust, and it's sort of like the same across the different groups. Back to you, Salmo.
Thank you so much, Noni. So again, some of the issues around dignity, issues around being accessible, issues around listening with the heart and not the mind, issues around feedback, all really coming up as strong elements to consider when building trust and relationships with underserved communities. But I wanted now to kind of like take advantage and perhaps pick your brains more, Walter, given your extensive work experience in both the Global North and the Global South. So from your work in the Global South, what are some of the similarities, difference as well, if you want, and advice that you can give on working with underserved communities in the Global North? If there's researchers in the audience from the Global North, what are some of the, tips you can offer them around how they should go about?
Yeah, to be honest, I do not find similarities in working with marginalized communities in the Global South and the Global North, because they are marginalized by the same conditions, by the same structures. So I usually apply the same principles that we apply in the South, in the North, and they work. For instance, building trust requires concrete action. It's not only a lot of talk, it's concrete actions. For instance, if we tell communities that they can communicate in the language that they feel more comfortable with, most of the time will be their native language. So that means it's on us to find translators, suitable translators, so we continue the engagement, and not to say this conversation or this project is in English, so invite anybody that can speak English, for instance. A second example or a concrete action in projects where we are interested in women, the experience of women will say, well, we have small children, we cannot participate. Okay, if we're interested in the women participation, then we need to provide daycare. That's what we do. In our budgets, we have a budget for daycare when there are meetings with women. So people realize, oh, so you're actually really meaning that you want us to participate, because we are telling you our barriers to participate, and you're trying to sort that out. Another example is when community says, yeah, but we work or we have the commitment, we can only meet in the evenings. You say, all right, so we arrange the timing of the researchers to meet up during the evenings. So those concrete actions are the ones that build trust. Those the concrete actions are the ones that, regardless if you are in the South or in the North, you will need to engage with community. Another one that I would say is to understand that even if we do all of this, we'll still may need something that I call cultural mediators, who are people that may be from those same ethnic groups or groups that understand the language of academia and research, but also understand the cultural practices. We shouldn't assume that just because we speak the language of those groups, but just because we have spent already several weeks or months meeting them, we know enough about the culture that we can do it ourselves. I mean, cultural mediators are extremely important. They are extremely important, and they also contribute to this process of maintaining the trust that whenever there is a chance of a misunderstanding, we have our cultural mediators here. So in our budget, we also have budgets for cultural mediators. And again, a cultural mediator is not another researcher that's just in a junior position. He's somebody with the skills, mostly from the social sciences, but also is part of that culture or that ethnic group that's going to be working with us. So that's also very important. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Walter. And again, you've mentioned, I think, in part of your concrete actions, really some important points that actually those, if flipped the other way, become like our key challenges, because the issue of budget, if there isn't appropriate or sufficient budget to support the community engagement work, then it really becomes difficult to do the work. If you don't have the, avenue to provide the flexibility in terms of the, the time that is needed, or you don't have the cultural mediators. I mean, some researchers might ask, where do I even go about finding these cultural mediators? Like, where do I start? So, you really have highlighted some of those things that, flipped on the other side can be key challenges, but I'm happy that you've provided it in a way that is workable, and I'm sure that will be useful for researchers in the audience. And to close us up in this segment, I really want to ask you a question, Andy, because this is something that I find quite interesting. You've worked with people with dementia. So reflecting on some of these key challenges, are they similar, or what are the challenges you've encountered with working with people in dementia, and how have you overcome them?
Thanks. And actually, I was going to pick up with Walter's idea of cultural mediators, because I think this also applies to working with people with dementia or people with other forms of neurodiversity. And I think that's a really important thing. And this was a piece of work I did a few years ago, and actually Joe Welsman was involved in this. But the first thing we did was we worked with a small organisation that had already got connections with people and done a lot of work with the dementia thing. So in a way, the first bit was we were in effect trained by them to understand the issues, and I learned such a lot about how to work with people with dementia. The first thing that, how do we actually find some people and get them involved in the workshop? So they helped us write the leaflets, and what's the language, and also what's the routes to get to people. So in a way, they were a little bit like Walter's cultural mediators, only with the dementia community. And then the second thing I wanted to say about it was when I actually came to running the workshop, they gave us loads of insights about how to do it. So one of the things, if you've got dementia, is you're going to have short-term memory loss. And if you're taking somebody through a workshop that lasts maybe possibly a couple of hours, it's a long time, and people could get lost in that workshop if they've got short-term memory loss. So one of the things that we decided to do, it's a little thing to do, but people had agendas for the workshop, but we also made sure that the agenda was up on a screen, and we also put it on walls in various places. So if anybody got lost, if anybody thought, have we already done that bit in the meeting or not, they didn't have to put their hand up and ask and make themselves feel conspicuous. There were lots of little visual stimulations that we'd put around or prompts around the room that helped people to stay in the meeting. And again, I haven't thought of the term of cultural mediator, but it's about mediating into the culture that's around people with learning difficulties. And to give us, with dementia, but to give a slightly different one, and it's just as I was listening to people talking, I was trying to think about running a workshop for people with ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And the person I was working with said to me, actually, Andy, if we can provide everybody with fidget spinners, I don't know if people know fidget spinners are little things that you can play with. She said to me, if everybody at the table's got one of them, the people with ADHD are going to feel a lot more comfortable in that meeting because they've got something to do with their hands. These are, on one level, really small things, it might appear, that you can do, but there's no way I would have ever known that without talking to those people. But they're all things, and perhaps going back to Joe's point about understanding someone's life world and creating an environment where people feel comfortable, they're all things that you can do to do that.
So, yeah. So those are really very good examples, and Andy. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'll pause here now and allow Gary to pick any questions you might have seen from the audience for our panelists to respond to.
Thank you, Samu. Yes, I'm going to ask this of two of our panelists. I'll ask Joe first, and then I will ask Walter. And the question comes from Sophie, and it says, community engagement involvement seems to be much more successfully embedded in global health research and more accepted than patient and public involvement in the global north, where we struggle with legitimacy and value. What can we learn about how CEI has forged ahead and achieved this greater level of embeddedness? Can we identify the factors for success? So I'll ask that of Joe first, and then if Walter can also give his view. Joe.
I think so. Listening to Walter and Nani speaking, I think there seems to be quite a lot of embedded infrastructure in supporting their efforts towards community engagement. So it feels like there's a lot of backup and a lot of support, and Walter talking about cultural mediators and bringing experts in to support. And I think we're still very early days. It feels to me some people do it brilliantly. You know, I'm still finding my way because I'm having to kind of make it up as I go along a bit. You know, I need to support researchers to do community engagement. So I've been doing some community engagement myself because I think that's the best way. I'm really going to learn how to support people. But I'm learning from other colleagues, and I'm learning as I go, and I'm finding my way. And it feels like, you know, we need those people from communities to actually help guide us. And we also need experts to provide us with support to actually support us to do that. You know, there are people who do community engagement very well. So I think from my perspective, we need a little bit more embedded training and support to actually enable those of us who've been doing PPI for a long time, but moving into community engagement to do it in perhaps in a better way with a bit more support.
Thank you, Joe. Over to Walter, and I think Nani wants to come in after, but over to Walter.
Yes, I would say that in global health, it seems to be more open only because of the reason that you're traveling abroad, you're going to a different environment and context, you may be more open to think, yeah, or maybe I need to involve the communities. If you are in the UK, you say, I'm not going anywhere, I live here. And you assume, as I say before, that you already know everything, that you know about the people, you know the culture, all of that. So in my view, that's why there is less opening. So I do training of researchers about community engagement, but also communities. And the first thing that I do is not to train about methods and tools, to train about changing our frame of mind. And one of the first exercises that I do with them is think about you are in that situation, or the situation of the person with ill health, or person that want to know what's happening with health. What would you like to know? How do you like to be treated? So to me, then the process of thinking about community engagement and involvement is continual reflection about how would I like to be treated if I were in the situation of the patient of the communities? What would I like to know? Because there is no any difference between they and us as researchers. We would like the same things. If for us it's important to be informed from the very beginning, from the research question, what is important for them as well. So to me, once we keep this into our mind, a continual reflection, what would I prefer or what would I like in that situation, it's very helpful to then start learning about what are the methods, the tools to use once you are in that frame of mind or put in the shoes of the other people.
Thank you, Walter. Nani, did you want to come in? I can see you're eager to come in then.
Yes, I think from our own learning, there are a couple of things that are really important, and it's sort of like related to what Walter said in terms of changing the mindset. So it's people, it's the right people, people who have the right skills. It's not just anybody who can do engagement. So you need the right people. You need leadership. So in our experience, our engagement has worked where we are because right from the executive director, engagement is important. Any scientist that comes to Cambridge Wellcome Trust must understand that you must engage. If you don't want to engage, you better find another place to go and work. Then the third thing is having systems in place that support the engagement. So one of the things that we've done, we've embedded engagement. So our protocol templates where researchers write their protocols, we've included under ethical considerations, the researcher must write, how are they going to engage? And where they're challenged, then they can come to us as the experts to help them to think through, who do they need to engage? What are they going to engage? So people, skills, leadership is very important, and putting in place systems and policies that then make the engagement successful.
Thank you, Noni. Salma, we've got loads more questions here, but I appreciate the time.
Yeah, it's amazing how time goes, isn't it? Especially when you're enjoying the discussion. I certainly am. I think, Gary, we will have to respond to the questions through an FAQ, which we can then send alongside the webinar recording to our respondents because of the time. I would really want to turn to our panelists and give you an opportunity, perhaps in 30 seconds or so, to tell us what is the key highlight for you in working with people and communities. And I shall start with you, Andy.
Thank you for that. Two things very quickly then. One, I think it's been touched on, is the reciprocity thing. I don't know until I work with the community what they want, but some of the things that we've been asked to do is to give people training on research methods so that they can carry out research rather than academics doing it. Another thing we did was just run workshops where there's a healthcare professional there who's doing health checks, because that really matters to people. Another one, we were doing stuff with asylum seekers and mental health issues. So we got a clinician in to come and run a session on pathways to well-being. So it's just building those things in. And then the other thing I just want to quickly say, as people may have seen in the news, there's been a lot of conflict in the UK around immigration and so on. What I'm really proud about is we got the director of our local applied research collaboration and our BRC and our Health Protection Research Unit all to send messages of solidarity to those underserved communities, to say, in this time of trouble, we stand with you, and we applaud those communities that have mobilized against that. And I think that can sometimes, people are not sure to do things like that. We got a very good response. And I think it's part of being an ally with those underserved communities, as well as all the other things that we've talked about.
Okay, so allyship and reciprocity. Sorry, we really are running out of minutes. So perhaps just like one key highlight, please, and 30 seconds, not 2, 3. Shall I go to you, Noni?
I think also just being there for the population, doing other things that the population needs done, if that is possible. So, for example, we started a schools engagement program where we mentor kids in school, and that was a request from the population. So, also being able to shift a little bit and take care of also things that are important for the population that you can do.
Thank you very much, Jo.
For me, it's many things, but I suppose one of the key things is seeing people from underserved communities actually actively involved in designing and actually redesigning research, and actually seeing that impact and that change that they have made to that research, which is around an issue that they feel passionately about.
Thank you so much. So focus from design to redesign. I like that. Walter?
Yeah, for me, the highlight is contributed to this process of community and people empowerment, from a position, from an initial situation of patient, vulnerable people because they are patient, to a process in which they are agents of their own health, in which they become empowered to engage with authorities, to demand better protocols, to meet, seeing that process, how research contributed to that, not only by collecting the data, but by facilitating the development skills and knowledge with communities. To me, that is the most important highlight of this work.
Thank you so much. So back to the asset-based approach. So now it really gives me pleasure to invite Jeremy Taylor, our NIHR Director for Public Voice, to give his reflections of the webinar and his thinking as well in terms of the strategic direction for working with people and communities for the NIHR. Jeremy Taylor, please.
Thank you very much, Samu. I hope I can be heard. It's been a really fascinating discussion. I won't be able to do justice to it in a couple of minutes, but I have been taking notes. I've just been listening to how people have described the key success factors for high quality community engagement in health research. We've heard people talking about dignity, about partnerships, about the importance of valuing lived experience, about the importance of building trust, building relationships, taking the time to do that, the importance of reciprocity. There has to be something in it for the people from the communities, needing to understand each other's worlds. And as I was listening to that, these contributions were coming from our global health experts, but also from our UK experts. So it seemed to me there is huge commonality in what we regard as good practice and principles, and also some very good practical examples that came from both the Global South and the UK. So it seemed to me that the premise that the UK is behind and has something to learn from the Global South may be slight, I think it's probably broadly true, but it rides over a lot of nuance and probably a lot of variation in the quality of practice, both in the Global South and in the UK. So I found that fascinating. I was very, very struck by the commonalities. I was also struck by what do you need to have in place to make sure that you get those good factors. And I think Noni put it really well when she talked about the need for leadership, the need for proper systems and infrastructure, the need for proper skills. And something Walter said, which I thought was fascinating, which seemed to me to nail the really important element of this. You need as the research community, you need the humility and the awareness that you don't know everything you need to know about the communities that you want to work with. And therefore you need to take the time to learn and to put something back, because there has to be something in it for them. And I loved your point, Walter, about the possibility that in the UK, maybe we just make too many assumptions about the communities we work with, because we kind of think, well, this is our home, we understand it. So that the need for humility and the need to be aware that you probably don't understand everything you need to understand seems to be maybe one of the key factors that differentiates community engagement in the Global South compared with PPI in the UK. It's unfortunate we have a different set of languages and a different set of systems, but I took great encouragement from the fact that when we got into the nitty-gritty of what does good look like, actually there were huge commonalities, and clearly there's an awful lot of learning that we can all do, not just monodirectional or even bi-directional, but multi-directional. So I think there's a lot to learn from identifying and sharing good practice in the Global South, also in the UK. And there's probably variation, and I'm sure there is variation in the quality of the practice everywhere in the world. So our simple model of the Global South have got it right, the UK has got to learn, and we're far behind, and we need to catch up. I mean, it's probably not a bad rule of thumb, but I think there's more complexity there. And what's really encouraging is this huge commonality to draw upon. The principles and the approaches and the desires seem to be pretty much the same, and the problems we're trying to solve through research are very, very similar wherever we are in the world. Local context is important, but the key principles seem to be pretty much the same everywhere. So I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I haven't had time to work out what the implications are for what we do next. There isn't time for that. That's another workshop. And I'll stop there and let Samu and Gary wind up.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeremy, for that. I'm really sorry to the audience as well, because there's so many interesting questions that came through, but we didn't quite have the time to attend to all of those. We are going to compile this to an FAQ, frequently asked questions document, which we will be sending alongside with the webinar recording. Now, the webinar recording will be available as well on the NIHR social media channels. You will receive an email with a link. We will use the email address that you used when you registered for this webinar as well. Gary, did you have any reflections, 30 seconds before I bring the webinar to a close?
Just to say, further enjoyed it. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you to all the panelists. And I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. Over to you,
Oh,
Sam.
thank you so much, Gary. And I echo Gary's comments there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And I would really like to thank our panelists, Anoni, Joe, Andy, and Walter. We really hope that you've taken something out of this session today, and that this has inspired you to continue doing the brilliant work that you are already doing, working with people and communities. And we look forward to seeing you again in the next iteration of this series. Thank you so much for today. Bye, everyone.